Okay. Let us begin.
Okay, you guys are recording now?
We are recording.
Okay.
It's the Votary Podcast, episode 6.
Episode 6 with Mikel Wisler. Are we starting over?
Yeah, we're starting over. Here we go. Ready? Welcome back, everybody. This is episode 6 of the Votary Podcast, and we have a special guest. We're a little punch happy here. We've just spent the last 45 minutes, maybe an hour, trying to get this technical setup to work through the laptop during plague time, of course, still. So the remote dialing in of people is not always super easy.
Could not figure out how to get that laptop on.
Yeah, just, hitting the button. Cut to that scene in Zoolander where the monkeys are. So we have an awesome guest, Mikel Wisler, who's a longtime friend and partner. He works with the Milwaukee Story team. It's all part of the Votary extended family. And he's actually award-winning storyteller, filmmaker, book author. And we thought this would be a great topic of discussion, the different mediums of story, books. Have you ever done a comic book or anything other than books and screenplays?
I have not ventured into comic books myself, but I have often fantasized about it and do read a lot of graphic novels.
So tell us what you have written and created as a storyteller.
Okay. Wow. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's an honor. So what have I created? Well, I've done a lot of short films. Spent several years actually pursuing exclusively narrative filmmaking and doing a lot of short films as sort of proving ground for trying to break into doing feature films. A lot of science fiction in that mix, but not always science fiction. And then I've also written both short and feature-length screenplays that haven't necessarily been produced. And I've also written 3 novels, 2 of which are currently published, and the third one is due out next year. And that one actually is based on a story that you and I came up with, Jed.
That's right.
And that one should be published next year. Time travel sort of thriller. It's pretty fun. And I've also written a lot of short stories, some of which have gotten published, some of which I'm currently seeking a platform for publishing, submitting to like science fiction magazines and things like that. And I've written a nonfiction book on making short films. So it's more or less, yeah. I think that, and my daughter, my 7-year-old daughter, regularly asks me to make up stories on the spot. So there's that too.
Which are honestly some of the best, right? When you have to just go for it. And I mean, my boys still talk about some of the epic bedtime stories of yesteryear, wishing that we had recorded them or written them down. And, you just kind of just go off the cuff, and it's like sometimes some of the best stuff. But I've had the privilege of working with you for many years now. So we first met way back when we were crewing up for the feature film that I made called Silk Trees. And you were assistant director on that. So you were the voice that everybody could hear hollering throughout the set. Pictures up, stand by, roll cameras, roll sound, the whole deal.
Why are we behind schedule?
Why are we behind schedule? That's the main thing people heard you yelling. And actually, you were a really great AD because you struck that good balance between sort of being the jerk that you needed to be, but with a big smile and politely trying to move everything along, which is what an AD has to do. Like, I've been on other sets where the AD is just a jerk, only the jerk side, none of the nice side, and that's not fun. So you did actually really great on that. And from there, let's see, I moved up to the Boston area where we are here in Worcester now, and then you came, what was it, a year later, something like that?
Yeah, it was 2008. So yeah, something like maybe a little over a year.
Not following me. It's just completely separate, but kind of we were brought back together.
I wouldn't say completely separate. I decided to take a closer look at at New England, kind of based on your recommendation. So
Okay.
it's not completely separate.
Okay.
Yeah. That recommendation got my radar sort of honed in, because at the time my wife and I were considering West Coast, considering Los Angeles, and then you kind of say, check out East Coast though too. And it was also as far as work-wise for my wife, it was a little easier transition for her. So several factors kind of played into it. So I went with it.
Can't believe that was 12 years ago.
I know, right?
That's just nuts to me. So far back. But anyway, okay, so you've written quite a bit more than I have. Let's talk about the magic and art of storytelling. What do you prefer more, screenplays or novels?
It's kind of been a transition for me. The interesting thing was that when I first fell in love with storytelling as a kid, it was movies, but my first foray into telling stories on my own was writing books. Actually, it was I was still fairly young when I read Jurassic Park for the first time, and then was like, I want to do something like this. I want to write books, and then started playing with that, with the idea that of wanting to go the direction of both, visual medium, doing cinema, doing films, and always writing books. For several years there, as I pursued feature filmmaking as a career, I kind of lost track or set aside. It just didn't. I focused, intentionally on the filmmaking side of things, and so I didn't do as much narrative fiction writing short stories or writing novels and things like that. I kind of, put that on the back burner for a while, and then as I started looking at the prospects of doing more multifaceted storytelling and branching, really kind of building a platform for my first feature film. What I ended up doing was taking the screenplay that I'd written a feature-length screenplay for a sci-fi horror thriller film, and decided, well, actually, I can just use this as my outline for a novel, publish that, and then try to use that as a means to sort of grease the gears to find funding and all that other stuff. Never quite managed to do that. Transitioned into, working full-time with Votary in Milwaukee. So my main mode of storytelling now is writing novels and short stories at this point, outside of the storytelling I do for work.
You were obsessed with sci-fi. Fair to say?
Yes, that's fair to say.
Why? What is it about that genre that you gravitate towards so much?
Yeah, conversation I continue to have. In fact, that's I've recently launched a podcast just around that whole concept of exploring why sci-fi, why does it matter, what's important, and my whole sort of slogan behind it is that science fiction just might save the world. Around this idea that science fiction is a genre that's just very naturally prepped and ready to it's just perfectly set up to ask big philosophical questions. It's set up in such a way where we can assess the moment we're in right now and ask, where are we going from here? What are the potential consequences? What are the potential upsides? And to really examine those things and put them in a context that allows ideas to reach their logical conclusion that sometimes is a little tough to do when we're just in our day-to-day lives. And they offer this grandiose scale. Oftentimes within the context of science fiction, you've got things like concepts like deep time and really understanding the scale of the universe in terms of time, as well as the scale of the universe in terms of space, and just how vast and how tiny and insignificant we can really seem in the face of that. And then ask those questions. Okay, so where does our meaning come from? Where does our sense of purpose, and even just the simple questions of where are we headed in terms of the science and political and sociological developments we see in the world, and what are we going to allow or not allow? What are we going to venture into unintentionally? One of the big things that I keep exploring both in stories and in conversations with people is what I think is just around the corner for us, which is transhumanism, where technology becomes our biology and technology become just inseparable. I see the trends already in so many ways of where we are going to no longer need these devices, because all of this tech is going to be implanted directly in us. And so there's some questions there about what do we allow, who do we become, what are we giving up in the process of doing those things? And those are all questions that science fiction is just ready set up to do.
Do you feel like,
so that's why I love it, I guess.
do you feel like there's some, like, I wouldn't classify myself as a sci-fi fan, but I also feel like there's probably a lot, maybe it's the ones that are more along the lines of what you're saying, the ones that ask bigger questions are the ones that I'm like, oh, I really love that film because, it got me thinking. It wasn't just here's the plot and here's the characters. It got me actually thinking about it days or weeks after the film. Is that kind of, as a more avid fan, is there that distinction between, there's a lot in this genre that's, it's just mindless entertainment with spaceships and all this stuff. And then there's these actual pocket of really good, amazing, examples. Like, I don't know if you have any that inspired you or that were kind of like something that even growing up that were the ones that kind of set you on this trajectory or.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good observation. And often, what I come back to is that, especially with mass production, like we create so much content. One of the tough things is that 80% of it's of anything mass produced tends to be not so great. So because there is so much sci-fi, yeah, there is plenty of like really bad sci-fi out there, and just mediocre sci-fi. And then there's
you could say that about every single genre, right? Like,
yes, yeah.
I've just heard you specifically like picking apart certain like space films and being like, oh, I watched it and it was okay, and then you come in, like, I see you talk about it a couple days later and you're like, there's no way that spaceship could have gone that far. Like, that's ridiculous. like it still sounds like it has to be grounded, even though it's fantasy. It's also grounded in this like reality, which is so interesting.
Yeah, there's that aspect of plausibility and believability, and there's also it kind of comes down to where within the spectrum, because it's not a singular or sort of monolithic genre. In fact, I was just having a really good conversation with a PhD about this on an episode that I just recorded for my own podcast around this, the genres of sort of soft science fiction, hard science fiction, fantasy, and where they differ. And there is a lot to be said about something like I'll generally don't criticize Star Wars for doing things that are patently unscientific, because Star Wars is not hard science fiction. In fact, it's probably not even soft science fiction. It's actually fantasy in space. We basically have magic and an empire and all these kinds of things. Knights.
Wait, you're saying it's not real?
I thought it was documentary.
Yes, yeah, you're right. It is a documentary.
Can we get a hard edit on this moment?
Yeah, we're gonna need to.
Yeah, I think let's maybe avoid such divisive content. you know, because we're going for broad appeal.
You don't want me to call it fantasy in space?
We're just gonna record over you and just be like, I love Star Wars, and just do like a completely different voice. Star Wars is my favorite show.
Well, that's the funniest part about it is like it's not that I don't like Star Wars. I like Star Wars. It's just as I like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and all that kind of stuff. Like those are all meaningful stories in and of itself. They're just not, they're not hard sci-fi.
No, I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah,
Star
we're
Wars
with you.
Is fantasy. Anything in space usually is like dubbed as science fiction, but it's not usually the case. Piggybacking off of what Jono was saying, was there like the first book or movie or something that really struck you early in your life that was like, okay, this is, sort of like really inspiring or kind of got you on the path of falling in love with sci-fi or just storytelling in general?
Yeah. I think I always enjoyed movies and stories and was very like imaginative in that particular direction, but I distinctly remember seeing Jurassic Park in the theater, just like as a fifth grader, and that was a transformative moment, and so I remember that. I remember later picking up the book and reading it and being like that, like I really enjoy that aspect of just how the story was fleshed out with so much plausibility. And I think that's where, kind of also to answer a bit of what Jono was asking there about the type of sci-fi I tend towards. I do tend towards the highly plausible, speculative sci-fi, the hard sci-fi, because there's something so fun and interesting and engaging about building such a plausible scenario and world, but also the real ethical questions that come out of that. So for me, Jurassic Park became this touch point because of the fact that it took a concept and it explored, well, what happens if you make this scientific advancement and do it just because you can, and do it without further, sort of in a vacuum, kind of isolating that scientific advancement from ethics and from other influences. Really, its only, or at least its strongest influence, is capitalism. We can make a lot of money. We can build a cool park. We can make a lot of money. And then the challenges and the sort of the cautionary tale nature of it. But I'm not only drawn to that. Like I definitely am drawn to stories that also explore sort of the upside or the real possibilities of what else we might encounter. So another incredibly formative story for me was the movie Contact, which is also based on a novel that was written by Carl Sagan. And it took me years, but I finally got around to reading the novel, and it's legitimately one of the most beautiful books I've read. And that view, I remember watching Contact. I was like maybe a high schooler when like 90s when it came out, and I just like watched it on VHS. And I finished the movie and just went off to my room to be alone. And I legitimately laid on the floor and I think I wept for like a half an hour because for the first time in my life, I began to have a sense of scale to the universe. And it was just mind blowing to think like, here we are on this like little speck, trying to like say eke out our existence. And yet this universe around us that is easy to look up at and look at the stars at night and be like, oh, isn't it pretty? but like not be able to fully grasp just the utter vastness of it. And so it became a transformative story as well. And those two books and movies kind of represent the sort of the breadth of what I love exploring, which is both, I love a good cautionary tale, and I love just opening up the horizons and saying, what else is out there? And who are we in the face of it?
Another thing that you love and I love, we share this, is a little, diving into the ideas of time travel. And, you and I outlined.
It's not possible.
Yeah, it's
not possible.
We have a book that you should read about that. That was really fun to outline you didn't change the title, did you?
No. It's still called Stop.
Stop
Yep.
is the name of the story. And it came from a short film that Mikel wrote, and then we kind of just got riffing on it, and it turned into a feature-length script after the outline. And I can't wait to read the book version of it. But cool little time travel idea. And so what do you think? Do you think, going back to what we were talking about with sci-fi, you think that you think it's the best genre to explore, like you said, the bigger moral questions, or why that specific genre? Why do you think is it because we're exploring the what first, and then that naturally leads to the why? Like, okay, here's the bounds of what reality is, and then it just naturally bumps into the why, or what do you think?
I think it often happens that way for a lot of science fiction writers, that there's a level of here's like a cool idea, a what, right? The maybe take like Ex Machina, and like, can we make yes, very much my kind of sci-fi. But yeah, can we make a robot that is so clearly a robot and yet trick a human being into believing that they're like sentient, have feelings and all that kind of stuff? And so that's it's a cool what, but naturally within that, because it's just like that idea already is so just riddled with bigger why questions and bigger philosophical implications around, okay, well, what is personhood, and what do we consider the boundary between machine and then sentience and personhood, and you get to explore those things in a way that it's hard to ask that question right now in a drama, in just a regular straight drama, because in many ways, like, that's just not the reality we're living in. If that were our current daily reality and we had questions about it, you might see it come up in a drama that deals with it, much in the same way that I think we're only maybe a decade or two away from a movie like The Martian being essentially considered a drama, because it eventually will be a real, not a lived reality for most of us, but it will be lived reality for at least enough of us that it's not exactly science fiction anymore.
I remember seeing iRobot, and he goes on autopilot in the tunnel or whatever. Like, that's so stupid. Mm-hmm. Just cars driving themselves. Like, I was
possible.
Yeah. Now it's like a couple years from now, where it's probably gonna be weird to have cars that don't have autopilot systems.
Yeah, it's gonna be vintage. Oh, that's a manual driver.
Oh, what?
Yeah, I think that's what's really, but that's the most interesting / useful / horrifying thing of what you've been referring to as hard science fiction, which is the more plausible could happen spectrum of the genre, like an Ex Machina or other movies like that, where like that's the part that's like it gives it gives the storyteller the ability to play out an idea to its logical conclusion. Like, if this, which we know is in the realm of possibility, then how far could it go, right? Which is, I think, a useful exercise. It's also very horrifying at times. And I also want to ask you this question. How much do you think like science fiction storytelling, how much of it do you think is like predictive, like self-fulfilling prophecies, right? Like, do we only pursue the things that we pursue in advancements in technology and stuff like that because we tell stories about them? Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
Star Trek.
Do we tell stories and fantasize about space exploration or artificial intelligence, and therefore we then actually start pursuing them because of the stories that we tell, or do you think they're more in tandem? Like, how do you see like the predictive nature of sci-fi working? Does that make sense?
Yes. No. Yeah. And that's a question a lot of people continue to ask. I think. Like, there's a lot. I mean, there's whole academic books and whatnot that could be explored on that nature. And there's certainly things we can point to in terms of like tangible things like Star Trek communicators leading to, cell phones and flip phones and all that kind of stuff. And so there's certainly examples like that. I mean, I would actually, from a philosophical perspective, maybe push back on the question a little bit and say, I'm not sure that we do anything without first telling ourselves stories about it. Just from a perspective of like what goes on in our brains and how wired for storytelling our brains are, and how necessary narrative is for sense making in our daily lives.
Right.
I would question whether we do anything without first telling ourselves those stories. So there's a certain value in what kind of stories do we want to tell from that perspective, because they'll potentially have impact and influence in terms of the kinds of people we become, the kinds of societies we foster, and so forth. But I do think that there is a double-edged sword with science fiction, where there are ways in which it can and does predict certain things about our future. So, like, when William Gibson's novel Neuromancer came out, what was that, like early 80s? That's the book that the term cyberspace comes from. That's where that got coined, and it is the birth of the cyberpunk genre, and his rendering of this weird cybernetically connected world, it was super bizarre at the time, and yet, like, here we are doing it.
Right.
It's like, this is Neuromancer in so many ways, and it became reality. I'm not sure that because Gibson wrote Neuromancer, that made the internet possible, as much as maybe he just tapped into something of the direction it was going. But you can also point to plenty of other science fiction examples where plenty of inventions and things that have not necessarily come to fruition. And part of that is that at the end of the day, science fiction, like most any other fiction, is about assessing and making sense of the moment we're in right now. So that's why they remain interesting and relevant, but they don't always date well either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like I remember when I was in college, there was kids that were in my class writing scripts about, virtual reality stuff. And, 2014, 2013, 2015, that area, it's like that had been talked about. So that definitely sparked, hey, I should write something and play that out to fruition. Like you guys were saying, like, what's one idea and what if we push it to the limit, right? You push it to the limit. But, I just recently tried the Oculus or like Quest 2 or something, and I think it's awesome. Like I could see in a couple of years, like you know how we have like the PS5, the Xbox, and the Oculus. It's like a gaming system that I feel like people are it's just gonna be common in households very, very quickly, because there was no lag. It was totally immersive, like vibration in the hand, like it felt haptic, everything that I could pick up, and the physics were real, hitting the punching bag and the ping pong ball, and it was like real life within this thing. And then you take it off, and then you're almost like stumbling around, like, oh, real world, like what's going on here? Like, it's so strange. So I could, even just the technologies that, it's just exponential. So like, automations and like you said, transhumanism. Like, I don't know what the next thing. Like, what movies are we watching now that 10 years from now we're gonna be like, that was it. We're in it now.
Yeah, like Whistler, what's the most cautionary tale we should pay attention to, or what should we be like most cautious about along those lines? Like, what's most relevant now, in your opinion?
I think we lost Whistler. Is he there?
That was a formidable silence.
That was a pregnant pause.
You guys don't know.
Sorry, I've missed a good chunk of that.
Oh my god, that was so good.
Do
you want to ask again, Mike Palumbo?
Did you hear me, Whistler? I was saying, like now we're kind of experiencing like sci-fi modern life, and even just like gaming, like John was talking about with the Oculus Rift and everything, where that still, to me, I feel like an old man, like it creeps me out. But like, I'm curious what you think about what should we be most cautious about? Like, what's the most important cautionary tale in your opinion right now?
Yeah.
Is it AI? Is it like Ex Machina? Like, should we be freaked out by AI? Because I certainly am.
I think there's a natural propensity to be freaked out by AI. I'm not sure that it is necessarily the thing that we need to be most concerned about.
Hey Google, should I be afraid of AI?
Yeah.
Alexa, what's AI? What's up with AI? Oh, it's working.
Is AI trustworthy? Just ask Alexa.
No, it literally heard me from my pocket. It says, "I describe myself as helpful," with the smiley face.
Oh my god,
of course you do. Of course you do.
Just like when you talk about that doesn't freak us out that your phone just was listening to you before you were even talking. These have microphones; they're all listening to us. Mm-hmm. And even a couple years ago, if you told me that, it would freak me out. Now that your phone interrupted our conversation because it was listening,
I was like kidding just then, but then I felt it vibrating in my pocket.
Why doesn't that freak me out? Should it freak me out? You know what I mean?
Yes, it should.
And just in a text conversation with friends today, a friend sent a message and it was all kind of like garbled, didn't make sense. And she goes, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry. My watch doesn't understand me."
Oh my goodness.
And I said, "Can you imagine saying that sentence
Hearing
to somebody even a few years ago?"
I know.
You'd be a crazy person.
Well, what we're doing is we're trading our convenience away, and we're giving up security and privacy, and we're taking a lot of convenience because it's helping us get stuff done faster, not have to be working as hard, all this different stuff. Yeah. But it's like, where's that line?
Oh, my watch doesn't even understand me.
And yet we don't have flying cars.
I know.
Dang it.
Michael Wisler, why don't we have flying cars?
They're on the way.
Yeah. Why aren't they here already?
They have made them. They just aren't as like commercially viable as we thought when in the 80s.
Right.
Drones are coming first.
So Whistler, if you're not freaked out by AI, what do you feel like? I feel like we started talking about something else.
Come on, man, you got to be spooked by something.
No, what do you feel like you're like, oh, we should be worried about this, or we should be really like paying attention to this, and sci-fi is pointing this out? And
is it Roombas?
I think the isolation. Yeah. Falling in love with your Roomba, I think, is maybe the big thing.
Roomba.
Stuff like, the movie Her. I think captures that well around sort of human isolation in an age of hyper technology, and my concerns are more not so much what AI might do in the terms of like Terminator and like, okay, the AI is going to rise up and kill us, as much as, like Jono was saying there, the amount of information and privacy that we give up for the sake of convenience. But more even than that, because right now we're just in this weird state where we give it up, and there's so much of it that, frankly, most of it's probably just like safe by default, because there's just too much information for anyone to figure out what to do with it. But eventually that won't be the case, and that's concerning, as is the fact that not so much that AI might choose to do something with it, but that people might choose to do something with that information that's not so ethical or moral. And who do we become as people as we, because we're actively rewiring our brains for this stuff, and as we raise subsequent generations to be so instantly connected through technology, what does that do to our brains? And then are we prepared for the next level of it, as I've hinted at already, which is once we start implanting this stuff in our brains, and I don't have to pick up my phone to respond to that text message or to browse the internet or do whatever. It's all happening inside my mind. There's potentially some amazing upsides to all of that. However, are we prepared for the way it's going to rewire our brains and fundamentally change us as people?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic too, is like the moral indifference of technology, right? Like every advancement, every piece of technology can be used for good or for bad. Do you think that sci-fi as a genre has a more pessimistic or optimistic view of human nature?
That's a really awesome question that I was actually just addressing in a recent episode of my podcast too. And like we see a shift as a real like nerd of sci-fi nerd. I've done my fair share of reading and studying, and we see a shift in science fiction. In its early days, there was a particular subgenre, utopian fiction, that was very popular. And pretty much post-World War II, the utopian literature genre is completely dead. It just does not exist. And there was a specific shift in, I think, just our collective psyche at that time when we looked around at the world and we said, I don't know that human beings are really headed towards such a great future, that we're really actually capable of building utopia. And that's where you see the utopia died, dystopia rises. And then you get a lot more cautionary tales. And so in a sense, there is a real sense in which science fiction has become arguably predominantly pessimistic, though I would also argue we need to be careful about classifying it as too pessimistic, because there's also a natural tendency within any time we try to start setting up a story and telling a story where you need conflict. And so it's easier to set up the Frankenstein scenario as, science does this crazy stuff and then bad stuff happens because it's riddled with conflict and it's an easy write. It's a little different. There's also why I think like a movie like The Martian represents a bit of a breath of fresh air to science fiction, or the book for that matter, because it's not a scenario in which science runs amok and it causes all kinds of unintended consequences. It's actually a very relatable story because the real antagonist of the story are circumstances. Happens to be stuck on Mars. He just happens to have to figure his way through this, and it just happens to be that using science, physics, chemistry, he is able to work his way through each of those circumstances and ensure his survival. So there is room in science fiction for that, and so we see it in certain stories. Contact, again, is a great example of that hopefulness that actually we're full of problems, and we're immature as a species, but hopefully we will reach a point where we grow past those things. But there is a lot of pessimism.
Well, I mean, look around. It's like being a optimist or being negative. It's just like sometimes I feel like stories, just if you're going to tell a story and you're trying to be, convincing, it seems like it's pessimism, but it's just,
Yeah, I'm just being realistic.
More grounded.
Do you feel?
I can't stand movies that are like, or stories that are like trying to be forcibly positive. It makes me like,
That's so true.
I can't like relate to this. Like
when I was a kid, I used to love the happy endings, and then now I like get mad if it's like, if it all buttoned up too cleanly. I'm like,
if it feels forced, right? Like happy endings should be something where it's like,
it's like
don't force me to be dragged down. Don't like just show just like, oh, there's like the depravity of humanity just for the sake of like just dragging me down. At least like,
it's too easy to do that.
Let me flatline.
So don't Walking Dead it.
Yeah, but don't do some forced positivity to try to be like, yay, wrap it up. Like, it's sometimes it's like, just be where the story needs to go.
Right. I mean, some of the best examples of good science fiction in that way. Like Ex Machina ends with a very cautionary, like, oh man, this is like what's going to happen. But like a movie like Her,
it's a happy ending if you're on her side.
If you're on her side, exactly. But like the movie Her ends, I think, on ultimately of rather hopeful note.
Yeah. That's a happy ending that isn't nauseating.
Right. Well, it's a nuanced ending because it's bittersweet and there's a sense in which there's loss in it, and that's where I think any good storytelling comes back to having a healthy understanding of nuance and how to tell a story that feels satisfying in that capacity and not like a blast of sugar at the end.
Well, it's more true to life.
Do you think like, I was curious about big scale versus small scale. Like Her, in my mind, is one of the smaller scale ones. I didn't even think of it till you brought it up. But is inherently sci-fi requiring this bigger, grandiose scheme, or is it possible to just tell this like small story where you're able to do all these nuances and everything, but it's more what you don't see, right? That it tells a bigger story of something, because like to me, I would probably, if there was more films like that, I would probably be more heavily into the genre, because I feel like I'm always thinking of like these big kind of master plan stories.
Sure.
You mentioned Frankenstein, Whistler. That's like a good example.
Which technically, by most sci-fi historians, would be cited as probably the first true science fiction.
Wow.
The birth of science fiction.
Huh. Oh wow.
Yeah, I think what is jumping out at me as we talk about like the optimism pessimism thing and what doesn't sit well when things are either way too dystopian or way too utopian is that the view that human nature is inherently good or human nature is inherently bad, I think doesn't resonate so much as there's good and there's evil in all of us, like the dichotomy of man, and we are capable of great good and we are capable of great evil, and there's always that battle, right? That to me is what when you can reflect that in a story and you can show that battle in the world that you're portraying, that's
or you're exploring a theme like loneliness. Like you're just literally just being like, everyone has felt lonely or everyone has felt anxious or depressed. It's like explore that theme and then put a situation in there where it's like, okay, we'll give you a companion, but this companion is not, even Blade Runner did it with,
yeah,
it's like
the virtual companion.
Yeah. Does that fulfill that human void that we all actually have or not?
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, John, I think it's a worthwhile question. The sense of like, does science fiction have to have scale? And I would say no. And there tends to be more there. And this is where I tell people the thing that I learned years ago, which is the best science fiction stories tend to be on pages. So they're in the pages of science fiction magazines. They're in the pages of books. So you tend to have to read to get there. Now, more and more, we're starting to see some of those hit screens, TV screens, movie screens. So, so there are cool shows like The Expanse. They're based on a great series of books. And you get some fascinating storytelling with Black Mirror that can be fairly small scale. And I've done that myself, where a lot of the science fiction short films I've made, they might have a backdrop of a big scale thing, like an alien invasion, like I did for a short of mine called Silent Universe. But really the story is about two brothers hiding and trying to navigate this situation and their interpersonal relationship, given sort of some of the fallout that's taken place between them. So there is room, I think, for those things within those contexts and there's something about being forced into this big situation that then forces them to have these bigger conversations, why one brother lost his faith, why the other one never had it in the first place, and those kinds of things, because you're dealing with this cataclysmic scenario, but it's just the scenario's cataclysmic. The actual execution is very intimate, and it doesn't involve but one big explosion scene.
Yeah, I feel like everyone's that I've talked to, their favorite scene from like Interstellar, at least for me, or at least the most memorable, was just when he was watching the videos of his daughter on the plane.
It always comes back to those deep human connections, relationships, really just relationships.
It's like how the music and the acting come together with the story of kind of a heart-wrenching moment of he kind of maybe put his career above his family or whatever it is. It's just like, oh, why am I like in tears about this space movie? Like normally that wouldn't happen, but it was executed so well in such an emotionally engaged moment, and it was intimate enough. I think that's exactly.
And it probably could have been set in a different genre and still gotten that emotional. Yeah. But relationships, like even what you were saying earlier, Wisler, with how you felt after watching Contact, that was even just your relationship with the universe, right? Like, it's still relationships, right? To get to know you better, indulge me on this little game. I have a list of 6, maybe 7 films, and I'll just say them, and you rate them 1 to 10 with how you feel about them. Let the world get to know Mikel Wisler a little bit more. Ooh. This whole episode is about sci-fi, and I love that. Okay, ready?
All right.
Plot twist, we made this whole episode up.
Right.
Recent sci-fi film, Arrival.
10.
Ooh. Starting strong.
Starting strong.
Not just 10 for a sci-fi movie. It's easily one of the best films of the decade. I will go that far.
I loved it.
Oblivion.
Give it somewhere between a 7 and an 8.
Is that Tom Cruise? I haven't seen it.
Yep. That, by the way, nerdy filmmaker talk, that's the movie that pioneered the use of 4K projectors for your scenery instead of green screen.
Not a bad film.
Mandalorian.
I liked it.
Oh, the LED screens.
In this case,
Yeah, or
projectors.
Oh yeah, they
4K
work.
Projection
they
mapping.
Yeah, they look so good.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's so much better than green screen.
Annihilation.
9.
I haven't seen that one. What's
Wow.
that? What is that?
Oh, you'll have to look it up afterwards.
It's based on a trilogy of books that's actually cool.
It's
But,
the same guy who did Ex Machina and Devs.
Yeah.
It's quite good.
Yeah.
It was a
Okay.
pretty good experience. I wouldn't go as high as 9, but that was pretty good.
Blade Runner, the original.
Which cut?
Good
Yeah, right. There's
question.
like 5.
The director's cut.
The director's cut. The director's cut. I give it a 9.
Time Cop.
Ooh, time cut. I saw that in theaters.
I think I did too.
But it's that's a pretty solid 2.
Sweet. Minority Report.
That one, I would probably place it. I'd say 6. It's got a lot of really worthwhile philosophical questions
Agreed.
that continue to be relevant. It has its moments.
All right, and the final one, this is a good hard science reference for you. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Wow. And you know what? I've never seen it. That's a hole in my awareness.
Well, you need
You
to
should
watch
get on
it
that.
tonight.
I
How-
absolutely need to.
How is Men in Black 3 not on that list?
I know, right?
That was time travel.
Dude, Men in Black
Unfortunately.
3 is dope.
3?
I gotta watch
Why
it
did you say
again.
3?
Men in Black
Men in
2
Black-
was my favorite growing up.
Men
I
in
actually
Black
watched
2,
2, then 1, then 3.
2 is really rough. 2 is really bad. The first one's really good, and the third one is honestly the best, I think.
It's funny when when you're young and you're watching one and you don't care if it's good or bad. It was just the fact that you could watch a PG-13 movie. And then you
love it.
supersede if it was good or
I
bad.
love this movie.
I know.
For
It
me,
really
that was
so
Liar
good.
Liar. I was like so excited
Ooh.
to watch Liar Liar.
Oh yeah.
Well, should we wrap? It's been an hour.
Totally.
Yeah.
Has.
Where
On
can,
this
where can
planet-
people find your books and your movies and
Podcast.
anything else?
And your
Any
podcast.
stories, Whistler, and your podcast.
Oh,
Plug
sweet.
yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'll plug myself into the Matrix here. Surprise Matrix wasn't on that list. But yeah, people can
What is
check
that?
out my stuff. It's at mikelwisler.com. It's spelled MikelWisler.com. It's a really weird spelling, so I just generally spell it for people. My most recent science fiction novel, Sleepwalker, is available there, as well as my first one, Unidentified. It's more X-Files like on there as well. That one is available as an audiobook as well. So if you happen to be more of a listener, you can check it out that way. And the books really are available anywhere books are sold, thanks to my publisher. And the podcast is also available pretty much on any podcasting platform as well as YouTube. It's called Exploring Tomorrow, Meaningful Science Fiction and Life's Big Questions is the subtitle. And continuing to do episodes with that, and exploring sort of like dissect stories and science fiction stories and sort of like what we get out of them, and maybe what's worthwhile speculating in them. And try to encourage people to check out some interesting, maybe lesser known works as well that I come across with. So that's available. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, any of those platforms. It's there.
Awesome. Well, Mikel Wisler, it's been fantastic to have you on this podcast, and it is a pleasure to work with you and be a friend with you in life.
Yes, likewise. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you.
Always good talking to you, Whistler.
Yeah, hopefully I didn't, scare away all your listeners with all the nerdiness. But
Well, it was close with the Disney talk, but we'll scrub that out.
yeah.
All right, everybody.
Cheers, everybody. Till next time.
Bye-bye.
Much love.
See you later.
See you later.
The cameras weren't recording?
Yeah, sweet.
What?